My name is Charlotte Fenwick, and I was 28 years old when I finally held the keys to the beach house I had spent nearly 10 years fighting for. 3 weeks earlier, I had walked away from my corporate job. That afternoon, I signed the closing papers. By early evening, I was standing in the doorway with a single box in my arms, staring at the ocean through windows that were, finally, mine. That was when my phone rang. It was my mother. She didn't congratulate me. She didn't ask about the view, the drive, or the neighborhood. She said, brisk and almost cheerful, "Good news. Your father and I sold the house. We'll be moving into yours tomorrow morning." I actually laughed, because I was certain she was joking. She wasn't. "Your father thinks we should take the upstairs suite," she continued, casually, as though she were discussing dinner plans. "You can use one of the smaller bedrooms. It'll be cozy." I reminded her, slowly and clearly, that I had purchased this property with my own savings, that I hadn't invited anyone to live with me, that I had plans for every room in that house. Her tone sharpened instantly. "We're your parents, Charlotte. If it bothers you, you can find somewhere else." In the background, my brother Zachary chimed in without hesitation. "Tell her the movers will be there before noon." I didn't argue. I stood in the quiet of my half-unpacked living room, surrounded by boxes labeled kitchen, office, and linens, and something entirely unfamiliar settled over me. Clarity. "Drive safely," I said calmly and deliberately, and ended the call. By 6 a.m. the next morning, everything was ready. At 11:47 a.m., my phone began vibrating. By noon, I had 34 missed calls. They had arrived at my beach house, fully expecting to begin their new chapter, and instead, they found the welcome I had carefully prepared. Before I tell you exactly what they saw on that front porch, I want to ask you something first. What time is it where you are right now? Where are you watching from? What's the weather like outside your window? Does it match your mood today? I always wonder how far these stories travel. Now, let me explain why my mother called 34 times. The beach house wasn't luck. It was strategy, discipline, and almost a decade of quiet, stubborn sacrifice. At 19, I worked nights at a seafood restaurant near the Jersey Shore. After closing, I would walk past waterfront homes, their lights warm against the dark water, and I would promise myself that one day I would own one. Not for luxury, not for status, for security, for peace, for a place that belonged entirely to me. Back then, I lived with my parents and attended community college during the day. My brother Zachary's private university tuition was called an investment in his future. Mine was described as something manageable if you're responsible enough. So I was responsible. Morning classes, night shifts, homework completed in my car between tables. I eventually transferred schools while balancing two jobs simultaneously. When my mother lent me $12,801 difficult year, I repaid every single dollar within 26 months with records. I kept every bank confirmation, every transfer receipt, because she had a long and well-practiced habit of rewriting financial history whenever it suited her. After graduation, I rented a studio apartment with a ceiling that leaked every time it rained. I accepted a position in financial operations, volunteered for overtime without complaint, and deposited every bonus, every extra dollar, into a savings account I had labeled simply Ocean. Friends vacationed abroad every summer. I stayed home. Colleagues upgraded their cars every few years. I kept mine. A relationship ended because he told me, quietly and with some sadness, that I treated the future like it was an emergency that permanently needed funding. He wasn't entirely wrong. But I had grown up watching my mother attach invisible strings to every gift she ever gave. I wanted one thing, just one, that carried no strings, no conditions, and no future obligations. My father, Douglas, rarely opposed her. He wasn't openly cruel exactly. But silence, when it is repeated often enough, can support injustice just as powerfully as words. Zachary had learned the system early and mastered it completely. If he framed his desires as family needs, my mother would defend them fiercely and without question. When he needed money for an apartment, it was helping him through a transition. When I needed money for a professional certification, it was character building. When his first business failed, He deserved a second chance and everyone's understanding. When I pushed through exhaustion year after year, I was simply independent. That independence ultimately bought the house. It wasn't a mansion, 3 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a detached garage, an upstairs room with tall windows facing the water. I put 32% down, secured a manageable mortgage, and kept a careful reserve for future repairs. 3 weeks before closing, I negotiated a remote consulting contract and left my corporate job for good. For the first time in my adult life, everything felt like it belonged to me. My mother had known my closing date for weeks. What I hadn't known was that she had already quietly built her own plans around my property. After our phone call that evening, I opened the family group chat and searched my name. 2 weeks earlier, she had written, "Charlotte's new place will give us all room to breathe." She had shared listing photos of my house with relatives and casually referred to the upstairs room as our suite. An aunt had carefully asked whether I was comfortable with the arrangement. My mother had replied without any hesitation, "She'll complain for a day and then she'll adjust." Zachary had added a laughing emoji and written, "She owes you after everything you've done for her." My father had not responded at all. Then I remembered something I had almost forgot. 11 days earlier, Zachary had accidentally sent me a voice message. He had texted immediately afterward, claiming it was meant for someone else entirely, and asked me to delete it without listening. I told him I had. I hadn't. Standing alone in my new kitchen that night, I played it again. "Mom already wired the 150, he said, his voice relaxed and unhurried. "Once they move into Charlotte's place, they won't need much. Dad thinks we're keeping most of the house money in savings, so don't mention the full amount yet." The message ended abruptly. I stood very still for a long moment. My parents had sold their home. My mother had transferred $150,000 to my brother. My father had been told it was $40,000. And their housing solution, their entire plan for where they would live, was me. This wasn't desperation after an unexpected crisis. This was orchestration, deliberate, coordinated, and built entirely on the assumption that I would be unable to say no. They hadn't sold their house and then scrambled to find a place to land. They had sold their house because they believed my house was already waiting for them. So instead of arguing, I prepared. I called my real estate attorney that same night. Close to 9 p.m., she asked me one precise question. Have they ever lived at this property, received mail there, paid rent, or signed any agreement giving them access? No, I said. Then put your refusal in writing tonight, she replied firmly. Do not allow a single box through your front door, even temporarily. I sent the same message to my mother, my father, and my brother. I do not consent to anyone moving into, storing belongings at, or entering my property without my explicit permission. Any arrival tomorrow will be treated as a day visit only. Movers will not be permitted to unload. My mother replied with a single thumbs-up emoji. Zachary wrote, "Relax, you'll survive." My father said nothing. Their responses told me everything I needed to know. They had read the warning, understood it completely, and planned to ignore it entirely. So I stopped preparing an argument and started preparing consequences. At 9:22 p.m., I called a 24-hour locksmith and changed every exterior lock on the property. I reset the garage code, updated the security system password, and activated 2 cameras covering the driveway. I also emailed the moving company my mother had referenced in the group chat, attaching a copy of my deed, my identification, and written notice that I had not authorized any delivery or unloading at my address. The dispatcher called back within 15 minutes. She sounded almost relieved. Family disputes, she explained quietly, happened more often than people imagined. The company wanted no part of competing instructions. Nothing would be unloaded without my direct, confirmed approval. If the customer refused an alternate delivery address, all belongings would be transferred to secure storage, with waiting time, transportation fees, and ongoing storage costs charged directly to the customer. That single call removed the weapon my mother had been counting on most: momentum. She had believed that once the furniture was inside, once the beds were assembled and the boxes were stacked in corners, I would feel too guilty and too overwhelmed to force anyone out. Preventing the unloading meant I would never have to make that impossible decision. I also contacted the local non-emergency police line, calmly explained the situation, and received an incident reference number. I printed it and set it beside my documents. Then I built the welcome display. I placed a folding table beside the front door and covered it with a clean white cloth. Above it, I taped a sign printed in large, clear letters: "Welcome to Charlotte's Beach House. Day visitors must check in. No tenancy, residency, storage, or move-in permission has been granted." Beneath the sign, I placed 3 sealed envelopes. The first was addressed to my mother. Inside was a copy of my written refusal, a letter from my attorney confirming sole ownership, a list of nearby hotels and long-term rental options, a projected invoice from the moving company showing storage fees, and a visitor agreement stating that entry, if permitted at all, would end at 6 p.m. and would not create any residency rights. At the bottom, I had typed one sentence: "A relationship does not transfer ownership." The second envelope was for my father. It contained the deed, my mortgage statement, and a handwritten letter. I told him I loved him and would genuinely help him find a reasonable rental, but I would not provide housing while financial facts were being deliberately hidden from him. I included a written transcript of Zachary's voice message, though not the recording itself. I wanted my father to have the chance to ask for the truth before hearing his own family discuss deceiving him. The third envelope was for Zachary. It contained his "She owes you" message from the group chat, complete documentation proving I had repaid the family loan in full, and one sentence: "The person who received the house money can provide the house." I photographed the entire display, sent the image to my attorney, and then quietly corrected the family group chat. Several relatives appear to believe I invited my parents to live with me. I did not. My mother called immediately, then texted, "Take that down before people see it." I replied simply, "They already saw your announcement. They can see the correction." Relatives began asking questions within minutes. My mother went silent. At 10:30 p.m. my father called. He asked, carefully, whether we could discuss everything in the morning. I told him we could, but that no one would be entering my home with belongings, regardless of what was discussed. He said quietly, "Your mother believes you're humiliating her." I thought about the message where she had told relatives I would complain for a day and then surrender. She had announced a decision about my property publicly, without my knowledge or consent. "Correcting it publicly," I said, "is accuracy, not humiliation." He sighed deeply. "Where exactly do you expect us to sleep, Charlotte?" "You had a house," I said. "You sold it. You received money from that sale. I didn't create this situation. I will help you identify options, but I will not become the option that was chosen for me without asking." Then I paused and asked, steadily, "Did you know she transferred $150,000 to Zachary?" The silence that followed was different from all the others. "She told me," he said slowly, "that she loaned him $40,000. I said gently, "you should ask to see the account before tomorrow." The call ended shortly afterward. At midnight, I packed my documents, my laptop, and the original recording into a bag, locked the house carefully, and drove to a cafe 2 blocks from the beach. From there, I could watch the security cameras and return the moment the movers confirmed nothing had been unloaded. At 6:03 a.m., my mother sent her first message of the morning. "We're already on the road. Make coffee." At 10:58 a.m., the moving company confirmed the truck was 20 minutes away. At 11:34 a.m., my mother's car turned into the driveway. At 11:36 a.m., she saw the sign. At 11:38 a.m., the first call came through. By noon, there were 34. I watched the arrival through the security feed, quietly, from the cafe. My mother stepped out before the car had fully stopped. She wore white trousers, oversized sunglasses, and the particular expression she reserved for entering places where she expected to be treated as someone important. My father remained behind the wheel. Zachary arrived less than a minute later, followed by the moving truck and two relatives carrying champagne bottles. The entire scene had been arranged as a celebration, a triumphant beginning, witnessed by people she had personally invited. My mother hadn't merely expected me to accept her decision quietly. She had expected me to perform gratitude, publicly, in front of an audience she had assembled herself. She walked toward the porch, noticed the folding table, and stopped completely. Zachary leaned around her to read the sign. One relative slowly lowered her champagne bottle. My mother tore open her envelope, scanned the first page, looked directly into the security camera lens, and called me. I declined. She called again. I declined again. On the third attempt, she left a voicemail. Charlotte, this is not funny. We have a truck full of furniture. Open this door immediately. The crew leader walked over to my father and showed him the written documentation while my mother tried the lock. She then reached into her purse and produced a key. I had been right to change every lock. She had made a copy. When the key failed, she pressed her palm flat against the door, called me again, and began texting. Your key doesn't work. Tell the movers which room is ours. Your father's is getting upset. You are embarrassing this entire family. You cannot keep your own parents out of a family home. That last message revealed the belief beneath everything else she had done. She did not think of this property as my home. She thought of it as a family asset, simply because I was the family member who had worked hard enough to acquire it. The movers refused to unload a single item. My mother declared herself the owner's mother and demanded they comply. The crew leader said, calmly, that he had reviewed the deed and needed my direct authorization. She called me unstable. He simply noted that paid waiting time would begin in 12 minutes. My father opened his envelope. He read the letter. Then he read the transcript. His face changed entirely. He turned to Zachary and asked something I couldn't hear from the camera feed. Zachary looked toward my mother instead of answering. At noon, I walked back with 34 missed calls, 17 unread messages, and 6 voicemails waiting. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel angry. I felt steady, grounded, and entirely sure of where I was standing. For years, her anger had made me feel guilty for existing in ways that inconvenienced her. That morning, watching her from the driveway, her fury sounded like something much simpler. It sounded like a locked door, remaining exactly as I had left it. Everyone saw me before I reached the driveway. She marched toward me with purpose. What have you done? I prevented an unauthorized move-in. Unauthorized, she gestured sharply toward the truck. Those are our belongings. We sold our house. I know, I said. Then where do you expect us to go? I included several options in your envelope. We are not going to a hotel while you sit alone in a 3-bedroom house. That, I said quietly, was your decision, not mine. My father stepped between us, holding the transcript in both hands. Charlotte, where did this come from? Zachary sent me the recording 11 days ago, I said. By accident. My brother's expression shifted. That was a private conversation. It was a conversation about using my home to conceal the consequences of a financial decision made without my knowledge or consent. My mother cut in sharply. This has absolutely nothing to do with the house. It has everything to do with it, I replied. You transferred money to him because you had already decided I would provide free housing. The two decisions were connected from the beginning. My father turned toward her, his voice quiet but controlled. Did you give him $150,000? Her voice dropped. This is not the place for this conversation. It became the place, I said, when you brought a moving truck, champagne, and an audience. One relative set her bottle down on the hood of a car. My mother announced that I was reacting emotionally because leaving my job had made me unstable. She described allowing them to stay as the only reasonable, loving family response. Then she claimed, without blinking, that I had known for months that they planned to sell. I asked her to show me one message, one phone call, one text where I had agreed to any of this. She said families shouldn't need written contracts for everything. I asked whether she had any evidence of a conversation at all. She responded by calling my tone cruel and my behavior unrecognizable. This was her pattern, perfected over decades. When facts became inconvenient, she replaced the subject entirely with my behavior. She didn't explain why she had announced an invitation I never extended. She described my correction as humiliation. She didn't explain why she had ignored my written refusal. She described my refusal as coldness. My father's brother, who had joined the video call I had scheduled for 12:30, interrupted through the phone speaker. "Caroline," he said, "did Charlotte invite you?" "She knew we were considering our options," she replied. "That," he said, "is not an answer." I answered for myself. "No, I learned last night that they planned to arrive this morning. I told all three of them no in writing. They came anyway." The movers offered three options: provide an alternate delivery address, return the items to the previous property if the new buyer permitted it, or transfer everything to paid storage. My mother demanded I approve the garage. "Just the garage, Charlotte, nothing more." "No," I said. My father selected storage. The initial charge was $2,800, followed by weekly fees. He signed the authorization form himself, quietly, without looking at her. As the truck pulled away from the driveway, my mother leaned close and whispered, "You are going to regret humiliating me." I looked at the witnesses standing around us, at the cameras recording everything, at the house behind me with its locked door and its white cloth table. "I think," I replied, just as quietly, "you regret that I stopped protecting the version of this story where you looked generous." The video call I had scheduled brought 11 relatives together, including my father's older brother and my mother's own sister. I shared my screen and presented the timeline, clearly and without drama. The deed, the closing date, my mother's announcement in the group chat, my written refusal, her thumbs-up response, Zachary's relax reply, the messages where she told everyone I would eventually get used to the arrangement. My mother interrupted repeatedly. She said I was presenting facts without context. She said I had become controlling since leaving my job. She said allowing them to stay temporarily was simply what loving families did. Then she claimed again that I had known about their plans for months. I asked her once more to show any evidence of that. She called my tone cruel. Her sister asked directly, "Caroline, did Charlotte invite you to live there?" My mother said I had known they were considering their options. Her sister said, "That is still not an answer." My father's brother asked why they had sold their home before securing another place to live. My mother said the market had created a unique opportunity they couldn't pass up. My father corrected her. They had accepted a fast cash offer because she had told him they were purchasing a smaller home with the remaining equity. He had believed that entirely. He had no reason not to. "How much remains?" his brother asked. My father looked at Caroline. Zachary stepped forward. "The money isn't gone, it's tied up in my expansion. It's an investment, not a gift." I asked whether there was a signed agreement of any kind, repayment terms, interest, a timeline, a percentage of ownership in return. "No," he said, "Mom trusts me." My father's voice stayed very quiet. "I didn't authorize $150,000. My mother finally admitted the complete figure. The transfer had been $162,000, including $12,000 paid directly to a contractor. The net proceeds from the sale of their home had been just under $204,000. After debts, moving costs, and the transfer, fewer than $22,000 remained. The call went completely silent. Then my mother said, carefully, that Zachary's business would become a lasting family legacy. She said I was jealous because she had invested in him rather than presenting me with a large gift. I didn't defend myself. I asked my brother one question. When Mom told you they would live with me, did you believe I had actually agreed to it? He hesitated longer than he should have. I assumed she had handled it. Did you know Dad believed you received only $40,000? He looked at my mother rather than at me. I played the recording. His voice came through every phone on the call. Mom already wired the 150. Once they move into Charlotte's place, they won't need much. Dad thinks we're keeping most of the house money in savings, so don't mention the full amount yet. My mother closed her eyes. Zachary accused me of violating his privacy. My father said, simply and clearly, you both planned this. My mother insisted she had intended to tell him later. She admitted she had known I would object, so she had deliberately avoided asking before the transfer was made. That admission ended every remaining debate. My father removed his wedding ring and placed it quietly in his jacket pocket. He told everyone present that he needed time to understand the full financial situation and would not be moving into my home under any circumstances. He apologized to me for arriving after receiving my written refusal. Then he told Zachary to provide every contract, invoice, and account statement by 5 o'clock the following afternoon. My mother told him not to overreact. He looked at her steadily. You sold my house and told me it was a plan we made together. You transferred most of the money while telling me it was safe. You arranged to occupy Charlotte's home without her permission and used my name to pressure her. I am reacting, he said, to exactly what happened. He called his brother from the driveway and asked to stay with him for a while. His brother said yes, without hesitation. My mother looked around at the empty driveway, the departing truck, the relatives who had arrived with champagne and were now standing in uncomfortable silence. So everyone is simply abandoning me now. My father answered her one final time. No, everyone is refusing to absorb the consequences of choices you hid from them. The call ended after 43 minutes. Zachary stayed long enough to tell me I had damaged his relationship with our father and endangered his business. I reminded him, quietly, that I had not taken the money, hidden the total, or created the recording. I had simply not deleted it. My mother was the last person standing in my driveway. She asked, without apologizing, without acknowledging a single deception, whether she could sleep upstairs for just a few nights, as though the morning had been a minor misunderstanding rather than a calculated plan. I told her no. She looked at me for a long moment. When does punishment become cruelty, Charlotte? I looked back at her. When does refusing to participate stop being punishment and start being self-respect? She picked up her envelope from the table, walked to her car, and drove away. The consequences unfolded over the following weeks, with a kind of quiet, inevitable logic. The moving company charged $2,800 for the failed delivery and storage transfer, followed by weekly storage fees. My mother initially refused to pay, but the contract listed her as the customer, and the company had my written refusal on file. She paid using most of what remained in the joint account. My father opened a separate account and redirected his retirement income into it. He didn't leave her without funds entirely. He simply stopped allowing her sole, unchecked control over money he had earned. He also discovered that she had listed him as a potential guarantor for Zachary's business expansion, without telling him, without asking. The guarantee had not been completed, but the attempt destroyed what little trust remained. Zachary's records, when examined carefully, told a far less optimistic story than he had presented. More than $90,000 had already been spent on a lease, construction materials, and equipment. Another substantial portion was committed to permits and payroll. The expansion was far less secure than he had claimed to anyone. My father hired an accountant and gave Zachary two options: sign a formal, legally binding repayment agreement or face a civil claim over the hidden transfer. Zachary signed. He returned $25,000 immediately and agreed to structured monthly payments, secured against business equipment. My mother, facing the housing problem she had expected me to solve, spent 6 nights in a hotel, declining more affordable options and 2 offers from relatives. She eventually rented a furnished 1-bedroom condominium 25 minutes from the coast. Hotel costs, moving fees, deposits, and storage charges consumed almost every dollar of liquid money remaining from the sale. She sold her luxury SUV to cover several months of rent. She told relatives, "I had abandoned her when she needed me most." But the family had seen the messages. They had heard the recording. One cousin replied publicly in the group chat, "Charlotte didn't sell your house, transfer your money, or sign Zachary's lease." My mother left the group chat that same evening. The social consequences affected her more deeply than any financial ones. She had always been the one who organized holidays, distributed information, and shaped the family narrative. After that morning, relatives began confirming details directly with other people. They didn't exclude her completely, but they quietly stopped treating her version of any story as the definitive one. 3 weeks later, she reached out to 2 of my consulting clients. She suggested, in politely worded emails, that personal instability might be affecting my professional reliability. One client forwarded the message to me immediately. My attorney issued a cease and desist letter demanding that she stop contacting my clients, stop using my professional address, and stop presenting herself as having any authority to comment on my work. My mother emailed me 2 words: "You've made your point." I replied with 4. "The point was made when I said no. Everything afterward has been your response to hearing it." A week later, she attempted to redirect mail to my beach house address. I corrected the request with the Postal Service and added the incident to my attorney's file. A second legal notice stopped it permanently. My father leased a modest apartment and separated their finances carefully and without drama. He did not rush to ask for my forgiveness. Instead, when the time came, he apologized with specific, quiet precision. "I saw your message," he said, "and I still got in the car. I hoped you would give in and save me from having to confront your mother directly. That was cowardice, Charlotte, I'm sorry." It was the first apology from a parent that contained no embedded excuse. No but, no redirection, just the truth offered plainly. 2 months after the move-in attempt, my mother appeared on the public walkway across the street from my house. I went outside only after confirming the cameras were recording. "You made me lose my home," she said. "My car, my reputation, possibly my marriage." "You sold your home," I said. "You transferred the money. You sold the car to cover the consequences of decisions you made. Relatives saw messages you wrote. Dad responded to information you had hidden from him. I corrected what you publicly said about me. You could have handled it privately." "I told you no privately," I said. "You ignored it and brought an audience. I used the audience you created." She asked whether I would have helped, truly helped, if she had asked honestly before selling. I considered that for a moment, genuinely. "I might have," I said. "A short stay, perhaps. Help finding a rental. I don't know for certain. But help offered freely is entirely different from housing taken through pressure and deception. You didn't build your plan around asking me. You built it around my inability to refuse." She asked whether she could come inside and see the house. "No," I said. Her expression shifted into something harder. "You used to be kinder." "I used to be easier to overrule," I replied. "Those aren't the same thing." She left without saying anything more. 6 months after everything, the beach house finally looked and felt like the place I had imagined during all those late closing shifts, all those car rides home in the dark, all those years of choosing the future over the present. The upstairs room my mother had already claimed as our suite became my office. Morning light comes through the tall windows at an angle that makes the water look like it's moving even when it's still. The second bedroom became a guest room, for people I invite, on my terms, with my permission. The third became a reading room, with 2 chairs and no explanation necessary. Empty space no longer made me anxious. A room didn't need to justify itself by being available to anyone who demanded it. Neither did I. My consulting work grew steadily. My father continued rebuilding his life in his own quiet way. Zachary made his monthly repayments, usually at the last possible moment. He told me once that the family would never be the same. I told him the family had always been built on unequal rules. I had simply stopped pretending those rules were the same as love. My mother's first 2 attempts at apology were careful exercises in avoiding responsibility. One suggested we had both done things we regretted. The other said she was sorry for assuming I would help, but added, almost immediately, that a truly loving daughter would have opened the door. I didn't respond to either. Nearly a year later, she sent a message unlike anything she had written before. I sold our house before finding another place because I believed I could pressure you into accepting us. I lied to your father about the money because I knew he wouldn't agree. I lied to our relatives when I told them you had invited us. I contacted your clients because I wanted you to be frightened enough to give me access again. Those choices were mine, and they were wrong. You didn't cause what happened. I did. Specific accountability doesn't erase the years of harm, but it changes something. It changes the air between two people. I agreed to meet her for coffee, in public, at a cafe near the water. Not at my house, she didn't ask. We didn't leave that afternoon fully reconciled, and I didn't expect us to. Our relationship became something smaller, more careful, and entirely dependent on consistent behavior rather than shared blood and family titles. She never received a key. Some people, when they hear this story, say the outcome was harsh, that my mother lost too much, that I could have shown more grace. But here is what I understand now. Standing in my upstairs office with the water visible through the window she once claimed for herself. My mother lost the house she chose to sell. She lost the money she chose to transfer. She lost the car she sold to cover the consequences of her own decisions. She lost unquestioned authority over a narrative that was never entirely true. None of that came from threats, retaliation, or cruelty. It came from one thing only. I removed the safety net they had secretly assigned to me, without asking, without telling, and without any intention of ever acknowledging what they had done. That was the welcome surprise they never forgot. Not the sign, not the locked door, not the moving truck turning around in the driveway. It was the discovery, slow and irreversible, that my no remained no. Even after 34 missed calls, every voicemail, every accusation, every witness, and every carefully aimed wave of guilt. I sometimes stand at the window in the early morning, before the light fully rises, and I remember her voice telling me to find somewhere else if her moving in bothered me. She genuinely believed I would leave my own home, the home I had built from nothing and sacrifice, rather than make her uncomfortable for a single afternoon. The version of me she remembered might have done exactly that. But that woman doesn't live here anymore. I do. So tell me honestly, if your family sold their home, gave away most of the money, and arrived with movers and champagne expecting to claim the house you had sacrificed an entire decade to own, would you have opened the door? Or would you have given them the same welcome I did? Thank you for being here and for sharing this moment with me. Everything in this video is fictional and created entirely for entertainment, dramatic storytelling, and thoughtful reflection. And this is your reminder. When life finally exposes someone's true intentions, the lesson is not to blame yourself for once trusting them. The lesson is to trust yourself enough to say no, and mean it, and not look back.